where the sacred meets the secular, offering safe, grounded, practical, and responsible guidance for guides. This is the Psychedelic IQ Podcast. I sort of have a fundamental belief that spirituality doesn't have to be so serious, and that we can have fun, we can enjoy ourselves. And sometimes spirituality can include four-letter words. And I got to tell you that out of all the interviews that I have done on this podcast, this might be one of my favorites. Partly maybe just some small town camaraderie, but the ease and skill that our guest today has in working through some pretty sensitive and intimate topics around touch and sexuality and sensuality, I think is beyond compare with anybody else that I have ever worked with. Dr. Betty Martin has had her hands on people professionally for over 40 years, first as a chiropractor, and upon retiring from that practice as a certified surrogate partner, sacred intimate, and somatic sex educator. Her explorations in somatic-based therapy and practice informed her creation of the framework, The Wheel of Consent. Betty now travels around the world teaching practitioners how to create empowered agreements in their client sessions. In her highly sought-after training, Like a Pro, The Wheel of Consent for Practitioners, originally developed to teach much-needed consent skills to sex workers and touch providers, this training is now attended by somatic therapists, massage therapists, sexuality educators, medical and healthcare workers, activists, human resources folks, and the spectrum of touch-based professional providers, all of whom complete the training with a clear understanding of how consent starts with our own bodies and then expands outward into all forms of human relating with or without touch. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Betty Martin. Betty, welcome to the Psychedelic IQ Podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. How are you today?
I'm great. As you can see, well, I'm not sure you can see, but the fall colors are just going like crazy behind me. So it's a lovely day.
I've got a beautiful tree right outside my office window, and I get to watch all the leaves come on, and the bumblebees come out, and the hummingbirds come out, and now I get to watch all of the leaves fly away as well.
Yeah.
So one of the first questions that I ask people as they come on the show is, what is your intention for speaking with us today?
That's a good one. Well, my intention is to have some fun talking to you and see where it goes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's all good.
Yeah.
Well, what are you working on today? What is fun in your life?
Well, as it happens, today is a day full of interviews. So I just got off one. I got you, and I have another one. I schedule them all, and I actually enjoy that because I think better when there's questions and conversations happening, and so thoughts will spark, as opposed to like sitting in a corner trying to figure something out. So
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we're here today to talk about the Wheel of Consent, and I'm curious to know how it came to be. What brought you to this work?
Ooh, and we only have an hour?
Give me the abridged version.
Yeah, let's turn this off. The abridged version. I was in my mid-40s after a divorce, and I went to take a few workshops on sexuality with other women, and blew my little mind. And one of those workshops, they were with the Body Electric School. One of those workshops, we played a game called the 3-minute game. And the 3-minute game is 2 questions. Each person, you play with 2 people, each person takes a turn asking those 2 questions. And those questions are, what do you want me to do to you for 3 minutes? Well, I can think of some fun things I might want to do to you for 3 minutes. And what do you want me to do to you for 3 minutes? Likewise, I can think of some fun things I might like you to do to me. And then you have a conversation, you negotiate what's going to happen, and you go ahead. And I had so much fun playing that game. It's like, oh, yeah, this is good. I'm doing what I want. I'm doing what you want. It's like, this is great. And at the time, I was doing some experiential sex coaching with people, which means my work was experiential. I was helping people learn how to be comfortable in their own skin and how to notice what they want and how to negotiate. And so I started using this game to sort of transition from the talking history taking part of the session to the touch part. So I thought, well, it'll show us, it's a way to get started. And what I found was quite surprising to me. It was a way to get started, and it turned out to reveal so much more about where people were comfortable, where they were not comfortable, where they got lost, where they got stuck, where they couldn't figure out what they were doing, where they couldn't figure out what they wanted, where they didn't know how to say yes, they didn't know how to say no. Just everything came out and became obvious just by asking each other these two questions. And the wheel of consent is a drawing, basically, of how these two factors interact, who's it for and who's doing. Because when I ask you, how do you want me to touch you, then you might, scratch my head or rub my shoulders or whatever, and I'm doing what you want. But when I ask you, what do you want to do to me, that's a very different kind of question. And now you're doing to me what you want and not what I want. And so it's a completely different dynamic. And that was a big aha for me. It was for most people. So yeah, the wheel of consent is just a drawing of what happens when two people play the 3-minute game. And then I became just completely fascinated with it and just kept playing with it and noticing more and more. And pretty soon I was teaching it to other practitioners, and then I was teaching it to a lot of other people, and then I was writing a book about it. And yeah. So the wheel is kind of rolling around the world, and I'm trying to keep up with it, basically. Yeah.
Well, we very, very much appreciate it. I was introduced to the wheel, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 years ago from another practitioner.
Yeah.
And it has always, so much of what I think we're going to talk about today has stuck in my mind, and it's been such a blessing.
Yeah.
As I have been able to explain some of the work to my clients, not in a very effective way, but at least fumbling my way through it. Before we dive into the content, that's sort of how we got to what we're talking about today. Who were you before that? What did you do?
I was a chiropractor for 30 years before that. I'm also a mom and a grandma, and I live in a community, co-housing community, in a small town. Bit of a hick and a cowgirl from my upbringing. So yeah, that was me before the sex coaching, sex work part. Yeah. Yeah.
What this? I grew up in a very small town in the middle of central Nebraska.
Yeah.
So I can imagine somebody, like, especially a female, probably. And when were you doing this?
I left that small town when I went to college.
Okay. So
Like,
you were
we're not
doing
still
a bunch of sex work in that small town.
No, we're not still there.
That makes more sense. Before we get into the actual diagram and the wheel and the components, you mentioned something that people don't know. Some people don't know how to say yes, and some people don't know how to say no. Tell me more about that, because I think that would you say that this is a worldwide problem? Is this a Western culture problem?
Yeah. Well, most of I I spent the last 10 or 15 years teaching this to hands-on practitioners, and more recently to practitioners who are not hands-on. We have a lot of therapists and coaches and stuff now. And because we teach in English, most of the people coming to study have been people from Western civilization kind of places. But among that group, it seems to be just about universal that there are some places where it's going to be difficult for us to say no to things that other people want. Maybe less so, maybe more so, but almost everybody has places where it's hard to say no. And almost everybody has places where it's hard to ask for what they want. Mm-hmm. And it may be easier to say, to ask if it has to do with getting some help, and harder to ask if it has to do with getting some pleasure. Or it may be the other way around. It may be, oh, I can ask for pleasure, but it's really hard to ask for help. And the same thing with saying no. I can say no to pleasuring someone, but I can't say no to requests for help. And I don't, I imagine that carries over into most cultures. Yeah.
Where do you think some of this comes from?
Some more than others, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you think some of this comes from? What happens to us that makes it hard to say yes and no?
Well, when you were 2 years old and you started learning how to say no, which is a very important developmental milestone, did you get praised for that? Probably not. I don't know anybody who did. Yeah. Or when you asked for something from your parents when you were a little bitty kid, did anybody say to you, oh, you do such a great job asking. I'm not going to give you that right now, but what a good job asking for what you want. I don't know if that happens to anybody. So I think it's very often inherent in childhood that those things don't get a lot of positive reinforcement. And sometimes it's, to some degree they do sometimes, but sometimes it's horrific what children will have to put up with in order to keep themselves safe. Because here's this great big person who has all the power in the world over us, and we have to keep them happy in some kind of way in order to stay safe and connected and stay part of the family. And it's a brilliant strategy that we have as children to keep everybody happy. And we take it with us as we grow up, and we kind of have to learn all over again how not to give all of our attention to keeping everybody around us happy all the time. And so it's kind of maybe, it's definitely a developmental stage for a 2-year-old to learn to say no. Maybe it's another developmental stage for an adult to learn to say no. I don't know. That's my psychobabble for the afternoon. But yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And would you say that because so much of this original kind of patterning is done relationally, would you say that the fastest way to learn better ways to do this is also relationally?
Oh, hell yeah. I don't think there's any other way to learn it.
Okay.
Because
that's what I was hoping you'd say.
When you're conversing with someone about what you want or what they want, that it involves another person. So yeah.
Excuse me. I think that there's sometimes we when we're looking at healing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's this desire to not be vulnerable in front of somebody and to try and
Right.
do as much of our work as we possibly can by like studying a book or
Mm-hmm.
like trying to do this work in secret and in silence.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some of it that we just have to do with another human being. And I think
would agree with that.
this is why I love the work.
Yeah. I'd say that there's some of it that can only be done ourselves. I mean, I guess all of it can be done ourselves, but there have been times in my healing and growing journey when I just needed to be silent and be alone and, and deal with whatever I needed to deal with. And there's other times when you just got to have somebody assisting you or supporting you or just being in relationship with you in some way. Yeah, there's no substitute. Yeah.
What would you say some of the symptoms are? So when proper reinforcement wasn't given to us or positive reinforcement wasn't given to us as a little kid to learn to say yes and no, how does some of this stuff manifest when we're adults?
Ooh. Well, if we have trouble saying no, it's going to show up in all of our relationships. And again, it may be easier to say no in some situations than others, or it'll be easy to say no to some people than others. Maybe it's hard to say no at work, but it's easy to say no at home, or vice versa. But you're going to, if you can't say no, you're going to end up doing a bunch of stuff that you didn't really want to do, and then you get resentment. You feel resentful. And then you get mad. And then you blame somebody else for being selfish. And you overwork yourself. And you end up trying to do and give all the time. And there are situations in life and periods of time in life where we are called upon to do a lot and to make sacrifices, and that's great. That's totally fine. It would be a sad world if we weren't able to do that. And if it's going on and affecting all your relationships, maybe that's time to check it out. Yeah.
So I say yes too much. I say yes to things that I don't want.
Mm-hmm.
I get resentful. I get angry.
Mm-hmm.
I project my anger onto somebody else and call them selfish.
Yep.
And then we start into this really big infinity symbol that just continues to grow. And whereas we keep sweeping resentment under the rug until something really blows up.
I've been there.
Is there, you're speaking my language, dear. Would you say that is it the same thing when we've been taught to say yes too often?
Well, I think I'm not hearing the difference between those two. I'm talking about when you're saying yes when you really want to say no.
I'm sorry. When I can't say no, rather if there's just, well, maybe I'm saying the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So in both sides of that coin, we get to the exact same place.
Yeah. If you're saying yes when what you really want to say is no, again, I think we've all been there. And sometimes sometimes I'm aware of it at the time and think, oh shit, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to have to do it because blah, 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 blah. And again, sometimes the situation warrants it. But if I'm doing it all the time, that's when it's a problem. Or I might notice it at the time. I might not notice it at the time. I might not notice it until after it's done. And then I go, fuck, what'd I do that for? Like, or I notice it because I'm resentful that this person has taken up so much time. And then when I look inside, I recognize that It's not that they took up time, it's that I gave them time. Yeah.
Sounds like there's a lot for this to work. There requires a lot of personal responsibility.
Yes. Yes. And then practicing the wheel of consent will develop some of that personal responsibility. Because when we're playing this game and we're practicing, okay, will you do X, Y, Z? Will you rub my back or rub my feet or whatever? Then you have take a pause to notice, is this a gift that I can give with a full heart? Is this something that I'm happy to do? And it creates a time and space for you to pause and notice, am I actually a yes or am I actually a no? Or am I a yes within these limits? And so you start to develop the ability, the skill to notice inside yourself, what are the signals that tell me I'm a yes? What are the body signals that tell me I'm a no? And as you gain the skill to recognize those signals and the skill to communicate that, and then you start to learn, oh my gosh, it works. Like, I said no and they didn't smack me. Like, it works, you know? So yeah, it's one of the benefits of the practice is taking more responsibility for yourself. Yeah.
I'm reminded by a quote from Brene Brown, or a story that Brene Brown says, choose discomfort over resentment. And for me, saying no is always uncomfortable.
Yes.
Or it's less now.
Yeah.
As I've gotten a little bit older, and a few less fucks.
Yeah.
I will say no a bit more often, but oftentimes there is discomfort inside of me.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Naturally.
When I want to say no, because I'm going to disappoint. I'm probably going to disappoint somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what kind of a person are you? Like,
or what punishment am I? What thing is going to be withheld from me? If I say no.
Yeah.
Well, we've already dipped into it, but would you just take us through the wheel and these kind of 4 quadrants at a high level and tell us what they mean and how they work?
Sure. Well, as I described the 2 questions of the game, if you play that, you take turns asking each other those 2 questions. What do you want me to do to you, and what do you want to do to me? You'll notice that creates 4 rounds of the game. And in 2 of those rounds, I'm the doer, and in 2 of those rounds, I'm the done to. And in 2 of those rounds, it's about what I want, and 2 of those rounds, it's about what you want. And those 2 things overlap. They cross it. It's like it's a matrix. And so then that creates 4 quadrants. And you can look this up on YouTube and on the website. But the 4 quadrants are serve, which means I'm doing what you want. And I've asked you, how do you want me to touch you? You've said, oh, let's see, will you rub my back? And I've said, let's see, am I willing to do that? Yeah, I'm willing to do that. And so we do it. And in serving, I'm taking what I might prefer and I put it on the shelf. And that's what makes it serving instead of something else. And then I'm doing what you have asked. That's 1 quadrant. The other one on the top, on the doing half, is taking. And that means that you have asked me, how do you want to touch me? Or what do you want to do to me? Either one works. What do you want to do to me? Oh, well, I'd like to play with your hair. Or, oh, I'd like to feel up your legs. Or, may I explore your hand? Or, may I feel your butt? So I'm asking now to do to you something that I want to do for my pleasure. And you say, oh, let's see, is that okay? Well, you can feel my hand, but only up to here, or you can feel my butt, but don't squeeze it, don't pinch it, or yeah, you can feel my legs only up to here, whatever limits you've set. And that's okay. So then I do that for 3 minutes. Then I say thank you. You say you're welcome. And in that quadrant, again, it's called take, which is a problematic word for a lot of people, because a lot of times when you hear the word take, what you hear is steal. And this is not stealing. It's receiving a gift of a particular kind. And that gift is access to your body, or this part of your body that we have agreed on. That's a very significant gift. And so I'm receiving this gift, which is freely given and joyfully given. Gift of access to you. So those are the two kinds of doing. I'm doing what you want, or I'm doing what I want. Very different experiences. And each of them will teach you different things about yourself. Each of them will challenge you in different ways. Each of them is a different kind of enjoyment for me. So that's the two doing halves quadrants. The two done to quadrants, one of them, you're doing to me what I want. We've just switched roles now. You're doing to me what I want. Oh, well, you scratch my back and scratch it just this way and over to this side and just the way I want it. It's not about you at all. You might enjoy it. That's great. But it's not about you. It's this now. It's about me. This is what I want. And so I'm learning how to, first of all, notice what I want and trust it and value it and communicate it. And I'm learning how to ask. And I'm learning that I can make requests and change and no, over here, yes, Dave, yeah, just get that spot right there. And I can get really picky on what you're doing for me because it's for me. It's your gift to me. So that you gain the skill in noticing that and communicating that. And then the other, so I call that quadrant accepting. Most people would call that receiving, but there's two different ways to receive, so it needed its own word. So I'd call it accepting. And then the other quadrant is called allowing, and that's when you're doing to me what you want, and I'm allowing you access to me. And in that one, I also probably will enjoy it, not necessarily because it's not about me. It's about you doing what you want to me. And in allowing, my responsibility is to notice that I have a limit, trust that and value that and communicate that. Yes, you can feel my legs, but only up to here. Yes, you can, play with my hair, but don't pull on it, or, for examples. So it's my job to notice that of course, there's a limit to what I'm willing to let you do to me. Of course there is. And it's my job to say what that is. It's not your job to guess. Mm-hmm. So this is where the self-responsibility comes in, and gaining the skills that allow you to take more responsibility. It's not, you should be more responsible. It's like, oh, these are the skills that naturally create more self-responsibility. So those are the four quadrants: serve, take, accept, and allow. Yeah.
So I have some additional questions on the quadrants, but right now you hit right on this last one about limits. Mm-hmm. And what if I say, sure, you can touch my leg, and I don't know what my limit is, or I didn't express my limit, mm-hmm. or I don't even know how to express it.
Yeah. Yeah.
what do I do in that case? If I've given someone permission and they gladly, they've taken a foot,
Yeah.
and I didn't know I only wanted them to take an inch.
Yeah.
What happens in that case?
That's a great question. Ideally, you'd say, whoops, stop. I didn't realize I didn't want you to do that. And of course, I mean, as you play with this, you get better at noticing, oh, I do have a limit, and noticing what that is. And there will be times when you weren't aware of it. And sometimes in workshops and stuff, people say, oh, I don't have any limits. I say, yes, you do. And if you don't think you do, I'll find them. Like, don't, like, of course you have a limit. Your limit might be, don't draw blood. And if you don't think you have a limit, it's probably because no one's asked you before, you're just not used to thinking of it. Or it could be that it hasn't occurred to you that limit could actually be crossed. Like, don't pinch or don't scratch or something. It just never occurred to you that somebody would. But if they do, then suddenly you notice, oh, wait a minute, I didn't want you to do that. That's not okay. So ideally, you speak up. The world is not ideal, and sometimes you might not speak up. And it's over in a couple of minutes, so it's then you can reset. But ideally, you speak up. And it happens all the time that we don't notice something until it happens. That's not uncommon. Yeah.
I'm also connecting a dot here that for someone who was never given permission to say no, it's all like, I'm just like putting myself in this situation that I wouldn't even know that limits are possible.
Yes. Whoever heard of such a thing?
Yeah. Like, how would if I've been trained to just say yes all the time, to have the self-awareness to be able to say, well, you can have an inch, but you can't have 2 inches.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is probably a really interesting exercise for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And the beauty of the 3-minute game is that we really recommend that you don't include sexual touch until you've played it 20 or 30 or more times, because it's just harder. If you're turned on, it's harder to learn something new. If you're moving fairly fast, it's hard to learn something new. If you're in places that are strongly habitual, which sexual touch tends to be, then it's just going to be harder to learn something new. So we recommend that you play it with your clothes on, play it not sexy, so that you learn the skills, you learn the noticing skills, you learn the communication skills, you get a sense for how it goes, and that's going to provide some measure of safety by just limiting what's available. And it's built in to take a pause. Like when I ask you how you want to touch me, you got to take a pause there and notice. And just slowing down helps a lot. So I'm asking, how do you want to touch me? You're taking a pause to notice. That pause may be a few minutes. Totally fine. We got all day. And then you say, well, may I feel your leg? And then I take a pause. Is that a gift that I can give with a full heart? Actually, it's not. Oh, well, actually, if you only go up to my knee, yeah, I'm a hell yes for that. But above my knee, no. So by slowing down solves a lot of that. Yeah. Yeah.
You've said this a couple of times. Is that a gift I can give with a full heart?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really powerful statement.
Mm-hmm.
How does one, this is a question coming from me in the moment right now, because I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, we've practiced the game about 20 times and now clothes are coming off, and it feels like, sure, I can, with clothes off, I can absolutely give that gift with a full heart. And I've got a big smile on my face, but it might not actually be my heart that is making this decision.
That's true.
And I guess what I'm asking, I bring the example up a little bit in jest, but how do we sense into this? How do we start to understand really what a full heart feels like? Is that a fair question?
That's a great question. And you notice the question is not, is this something I would enjoy? That's a different question.
Okay.
So if you're asking me, will you rub my back, for example, I'm not that thrilled with your back. I don't know. It might be kind of fun, might not. I don't know. That's not the question, because I might or might not actually enjoy giving you a back rub. But the question is this something that I can give with a full heart, meaning, oh yeah, I care about you. I have no reservations about it. Oh, hell yeah, honey, I'd be glad to give you a back rub. You know, that it's not the same question as, do you want to, or would you enjoy this? That's a different question.
If I'm giving with a full heart, is there ever an expectation of reciprocity?
Well, in the game, you are going to take turns. So it is going to be your turn at some point. But I believe in giving an actual gift. What makes it a gift is that there's no reciprocity expected. Yeah. That's kind of my bias, or how I think of giving a gift. In real life, if I'm always giving and never get anything back, it's time to look at the nature of the relationship.
For sure.
Yeah. I kind of think of gift in this sort of rarefied ideal thing that if I'm expecting something back, it may not actually be a gift. It may be a manipulation to get you to give me the thing that I want because I'm too embarrassed to ask for it.
And that is where, when I ask the question, like, this is so much of my early childhood experience that I'll do this for you, but I'm going to get a piece of candy afterwards. Yeah. I'm going to get a treat afterwards. Yeah. And I think the treats grow bigger as we get into adulthood. And they also come with bigger strings and potentially larger ramifications.
Yes,
so
absolutely. Absolutely. And this is one of the benefits of learning how to ask for what you want, which will happen with the game, is that you become able to ask for what you want, and then you can stop manipulating people into giving you what you want because you were too chicken to ask for it. Well, that's probably unfair, calling people chicken, but because it's hard for everybody. Of course it is. Like, there's nothing wrong with you if it's hard to ask. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, we've whet my appetite for. I appreciate all of these examples because I think that it's really helpful to understand from a practitioner perspective. The wheel is wonderful just in relationship with a partner, with whoever you want to be in a deeper sense of intimacy with. But now I'm going to switch over to a more professional role. So most of the folks that are listening are psychedelic practitioners, facilitators, guides, something like that. Tell me how Actually, you know what? I'm going to pause that question because I remembered one. When you were talking about the wheel, one of the things that I remembered seeing at some point in time was a shadow side for these 4 quadrants.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if, before we jump to the facilitator side, would you talk a little bit about the shadow of the 4 quadrants?
Yeah. Yeah, in the diagram of the wheel, I draw the cross bars and then I draw a red circle, which is, it represents consent. So that within consent, or within the agreement, there's a gift going here. I've said, will you? You've said yes. I've said, may I? You have said yes. So it's a clear gift. It's also possible to have the dynamics without the gift aspect, which means you're outside of the circle of consent. You haven't agreed, but you're reaching over there and taking that thing anyway. You can steal. Stealing is, you could say, is a dynamic of the take quadrant, but it's outside of consent, and so that's what makes it stealing. So each of those quadrants has, I've used the word shadow, but I'm not a Jungian. It's very loosely defined. It just means what happens if the dynamic happens, but without the agreement. Or if you sort of take it too far. For example, the shadow of the allowing quadrant would be the pushover going along with something, the doormat, a victim, like victim of a crime or something, and something's been taken from you, but you didn't agree to it. It's happened to you anyway. And I think it's important to recognize that not everything that happens in our life fits nicely into this consent agreement thing. We're learning the skills that allow us to create consent, but not everything is consensual. Of course it's not. And so the shadow of the serve quadrant would be the do-gooder, forced labor, being a martyr to doing all the things and doing all the things. The shadow of the taking quadrant would be groping, assault, rape, war. You know, I'm doing stuff to you and bombing your village. I sure didn't get permission from you, you know, but I'm doing it anyway. The shadow of the accepting quadrant would be the entitled, the expectations, the enslavement could fit in there, being the benefit of the other person's forced labor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just brought up consent and agreements, and there's this, you know, big dark line that contains the wheel, mm-hmm. and there's this stuff that happens outside of the concept of consent and mm-hmm. agreements. I mm-hmm. wonder, what is your definition of consent? How do we know when we have consent?
Use your words. That's not really quite enough, though. Consent in the dictionary means basically saying yes. So if I get your consent, that means I get a yes out of you somehow. If I give consent, it means I say yes to the thing that you want. That's an important thing to be able to do, but it's not everything that you need. And so I in personal dynamics, I sort of think of consent as an expanded definition to be really more of an agreement that we make. And that's more like, this sounds fun to me. What sounds fun to you? Oh, this sounds fun to me. Oh, let's find a place that sounds fun to both of us. That's much more interesting than, is it okay if I do this thing to you? I could say yes, but it doesn't sound very fun. So consent, in the sort of public discourse of consent, it's mostly this, can I get you to say yes to this thing that I want to do? And that's a big improvement over not having consent, but it doesn't really elevate the experience very much. And that's kind of the legal definition as well.
When we're talking about doing this with a full heart, consent really shouldn't have any manipulation included in it.
Yeah. And some people will define consent as it's not coercion, you can't manipulate, you need to include the power imbalance, it's ongoing, it's no pressure, and that's true. And you could also define consent, and probably the legal definition, I don't know, but is more like, if I can get a yes out of you, then I'm good to go. It just depends on how you're using the word. Yeah.
Maybe good for a legal contract, less good for a human, emotional contract.
Yeah. It's not going to be as much fun.
Yeah. All right. Now let's switch over to the practitioner side. Thanks for indulging my forgetfulness. Tell me how this expands to practitioner, and then if you want to go into your thoughts on how this would go into psychedelic work. What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, as a practitioner, and I work mostly with coaches, sex workers, psychotherapists, so we're working one-on-one or one-on-two with a client or a couple. And when I'm in my role as a coach or a therapist, I am in the serving quadrant. I am here doing what is most helpful to you, that's within the realm of what I'm willing to give and qualified to give. So I'm in the serving quadrant. I'm doing, to the best that I can, what is useful for you. That means that what I think would be fun is off the table. I might like to know all about blah, blah, blah that you did or blah, 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 but am I asking you that for my own entertainment? Or I'm asking you that because it's helpful to you? Or if I'm doing sex coaching, or if I'm doing, sex work's kind of its own category. Or maybe I'm a massage therapist. I'm doing to you what is useful for you. If I switch over into kind of feeling you up, that's a problem. So what happens for practitioners is that as you get better at noticing the difference between as I get better at noticing the difference between doing what I want and doing what you want, that distinction becomes more and more clear, so that I can take that into my sessions and be very clear who it's for. And I take my own desires and my own interests and put them on the shelf. They just are not useful here. It doesn't mean that I don't get to be a human being and relate to you as a human being, but my desires are on the shelf. And I think, and that's the sort of general principle of working with a client. I imagine, now I am not a psychedelic facilitator. I have dabbled, but I'm not qualified to facilitate that. But I imagine that is going to be really crucial in working with your clients or your, what do you call them? We'll call them clients here.
Clients are good.
Yeah, clients.
Seekers,
yeah. That it's super important that you remember that you are here in support of their experience, and you get your own desires out of the fucking way. Like, when I hear about facilitators who are getting their hands on their clients or even being sexual with clients, I just think, what the fuck are you thinking? Like, ugh. I don't know if that happens very often, but whatever. But as far as the wheel's concerned, you are here in service to those clients, and your desires and your interests and what you think is fun just needs to be put on the shelf. Yeah. And also there's this really comes up in working with clients one-on-one as coaches and therapists and stuff, is that it's very common, and this happens in the medical situation as well, it's very common that the provider or the therapist will say, is this okay? Do I have permission to do X, Y, Z? But that's backwards, because if I'm asking permission to do X, Y, Z, then by definition, it's something that I want. But we've already established it's not about what I want, it needs to be what you want. So what you have to do, especially if you're dealing with relationship, we have to do is help them learn to ask for what they want. So that what you do is in service to them. Because if the practitioner says, I think this would be good, are you willing to do this? Then the client hears that and goes, oh, this is something that I'm supposed to want, so I guess I better want it, so I'll say yes, when it's really not something that they want. That's going to happen all the time. So a lot of what practitioners learn in our classes is how to reverse that. You should never be asking your client, is this okay? Do I have permission to do this? What you need to be doing instead is helping them learn how to ask for what they want. That's a completely different program. And I'm not sure how it's going to apply in your situation, other than having this very thorough conversation while they're still sober, finding out what kind of support they want, what kind of support they don't want. If touch is available, then is it something that they want, is it something they don't want, what do they think they might want? And again, I realize that once you're in state, that could change. So I'm not an expert on that. But I do think that getting permission from them is the wrong approach. What you need to do is help them articulate what is going to be useful for them.
Are you familiar with Kalia Taylor?
Mm-mm.
So Kalia wrote a beautiful book on ethics and especially expanded states of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And she was on the first season of the podcast, and we talked about dual role and multiple role relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And
oh, Lordy.
That, well, and it gets even more complicated in the psychedelic space, mm-hmm. because the relationship, if you are, in this case, if you're my client and we're having this conversation sober, mm-hmm. that's one relationship. Mm-hmm. When you ingest a mind-altering substance, mm-hmm. you are now essentially a second person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the general rule of thumb for informed consent is that we cannot ask for additional consent.
Right.
Once somebody is under the influence.
Yes. Yes.
So
yep.
I think that, and I was thinking when we were talking about, boundaries and changing our minds, changing the limits, I guess, what the word that we used before, is that really, I think a client should be able to, if you had all these conversations up front and said, decided with the client, yes, you can hold my hand. Yes, you can touch my shoulder. Yes, you can touch my knee. If I ask for a hug, I will receive a hug. And I think that what I'm thinking is that it's smart to say the client can always retract or set up a stricter boundary and retract one of their limits, but they're never going to be able to, ideally, they're not going to be able to ask for more, because
That's
the
right.
person that gave additional consent in the experience might not want to give consent when they come out of the experience.
Right. Yes. It's the same with sex work and sex surrogacy, for example. You can, the client can narrow their choices, but they can't expand them. Yeah. And sexual arousal is an altered state of consciousness as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I think that we're probably talking about the exact same thing. One of the interesting aspects of this work is that they are truly, many of these substances are boundary dissolving.
Yes.
So what boundaries we had before going in tend to get dissolved rather quickly in some cases. And
that's where it becomes the facilitator's job to guard those boundaries with your life. The participant, the client has said, I don't want to be touched, or I might want to have you hold my hand, but no more. Then when they're in state and they ask you for all this other stuff, your job is to say, we agreed that I would hold your hand, and that's what I'm going to do. And not expand it just because it feels lovely to you. And that's the job. That's the job of the practitioner in working with clients, and I believe that's also the job of the facilitator. Yeah.
What happens when I've made an agreement with my client to say, I can put my hand on your knee? And we talked about that while the client was sober. And now we're in the middle of the experience, and the client says, can you put your hand on my knee? And as a facilitator, I'm now in this, whether I've taken a substance or not, I'm sort of in the field. Like we're in the energetics of this. And now something has shifted inside of me where my attraction to the client has shifted in a way that is unexpected. So now I have some hidden desire that is not shared.
Get over it. Just get over it. That I would guess that's a common problem. Yeah.
So as a facilitator, what do I do? Do I give the client what they want and hold their knee? Or do I say, you know what, I'm having a sensation right now, or do I not even say anything at all and just say, you know what, I'm just unable to meet your needs right now, because I think that what's coming up inside of me, they're triggering something, and it's coming up inside of my system that doesn't feel in alignment anymore.
Yeah. I'm not sure about, I'm not a psychedelics facilitator, but I question whether it's useful to go into any explanation that involves yourself. I would imagine it's more useful to say, I'm no longer able to put my hand on your leg.
Because the intention with which I'm performing this action is just as important in some ways, I guess, as what the client is wanting. Because if my intention isn't coming from my heart, in a very pure place, then I'm doing a disservice to the client, I would imagine.
Yeah. And this happens in sex coaching and sexological body work and similar things, surrogate partnership, that you may have an attraction to the client, or it may be just that you're turned on in the moment, but you are a grown-up. So just deal with it. Like, you don't get to have everything that you want. And it's part of the grown-upness of being qualified to offer this kind of service, that you can take your desires, which may be very exciting, and just put them on the shelf. Like, if you can't do that, then I would question your suitability to do this kind of work. Because you know, it's not about you. And it's certainly part of erotic and sexual maturity, and I would say emotional maturity, to be able to take what you want, put it on the shelf for now because you are in service. And sometimes that's hard to do. I have had my mess ups, and it can be hard to do, but that's a skill that is developed with some maturity and with some growing up and with some practice.
I think you hit on it. You said everything that you needed to say right there.
Now, I have heard that that sometimes the facilitator is also ingesting, which I guess sometimes works, but I can't imagine how. I mean, that's not something that I would trust. I don't think. I don't know. I guess it may depend on what, but
and
that would be really hard.
In some ways, it's a complicated question to answer. If we look at the scope of psychedelics, I tend to break things up into 4 big buckets. There's recreational, there's clinical, therapeutic, and then spiritual kind of / indigenous. And almost, if not every time I have sat with an indigenous practitioner, they are all ingesting the substance for spiritual, energetic, visionary reasons. But to your point, I think for many of the people that we're talking to, especially in this culture, that are coming from a clinical or a therapeutic perspective, have some pretty strong feelings about the practitioner ingesting. So I think that your intuition is pretty spot on.
I can't imagine being able to hold that kind of container being in state. There's one thing I wanted to add. I just thought a minute ago. This was taught by a friend of mine named David Cates, and he says, if you are the practitioner, or even if you're just the doing partner, obviously you're only doing what the other person wants. And so you need a verbal yes from them, they want this, and you need a body language yes. Most people know this part, that if I'm saying yes, like, that's not going to cut it, But you also need your own gut to say yes. So my client's on the table, the word yes is coming out of her. Her body is moving so that it looks like it's ready to go. But something in my gut says, something's not right here. Then you trust that. Because, we don't always necessarily know what the signal is, but some signal we're getting that says, this doesn't feel right. Then any of those 3, the verbal yes, the body yes, and the gut yes, if any of those are off, it's a no-go. And the client may be disappointed, but that you need, as the facilitator, your gut also has to be a yes. And if it's not, then trust that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. What would you say are the biggest mistakes practitioners make that you have seen? The times when, whether it's significant or less harm is caused, and then maybe rupture and repair process occurs.
Well, I've seen a lot of practitioners, because I work in the sexual and erotic realms. I have seen enough practitioners who got their own desires in the way. Happens. And this one just gets my goat. People who call themselves sexual healers, who think that by having sex, having intercourse with someone, that's going to be healing for them. And it's like, whatever. I mean, just because you want to fuck this person, now you think you can do it because don't get me started on that. But so, one of the common things that happens is that the practitioner thinks they are more powerful than they actually are, or they don't understand the power that they do have. They think that, I'm the powerful healer, I can, or they let their own desires get in the way. That's kind of an egregious form. But I think what probably happens more in an ethical situation is that the practitioner, if I have this modality that I think is really great, and it may be great, and I'm going to do X, Y, Z to you because that's what my modality teaches me. And so I say, I ask for consent. I say, this, is it okay if we do this? And then the client is going, I said this a minute ago, the client's going, oh gosh, I guess that's what I'm supposed to want because that's what the expert says. And that doesn't sound good to me, but I'm supposed to be okay with it. So I'm going to make myself be okay with it. And then they say yes. And then you get that little bit of permission and you go ahead and do your modality. And, in surgery, that may be the appropriate way to go, but we're talking about working with people with their relationships. That's completely backwards. What you need to do instead is teach the person how to ask for what they want so that they are not stuck in this loop of going along with what they think you want. I'd say getting that backwards is probably the most common mistake. Yeah.
I just wrote down, how do we educate clients to be better clients? So how can you give us a couple of shorthand tips to...
Well, what do you mean by a better client?
To ask for what they want rather than us asking.
Well, that's easy. You just keep asking them what they want.
Okay.
I mean, I say that as if it's easy. But in my kind of work where I'm working experientially with people, really, I quite literally ask them what they want over and over and over and give them plenty of time and plenty of space and plenty of attention and support for their own discomfort. Because it's an uncomfortable place, as we mentioned before. And so sometimes you have to start small and slow and give them, small choices and ask them, okay, if would you like a little bit of touch right now as a sort of get acquainted kind of touch for just a couple of minutes? And they'll say, yeah, but I don't know what. So, that's okay. A lot of people don't know. We're just going to wait and it'll bubble up. And then something will bubble up and, will you hold my hand? Yeah, sure. You do that for a couple minutes. now what would you like for a couple of minutes? And so it's mostly just going slow and giving them the support for their discomfort. Sometimes you have to, if that's too much of a leap for them, sometimes you have to give them some multiple choice and stuff like that. But it's basically you just keep asking them. Yeah.
I hear a lot of opening up a lot of space for permission and patience and just more and more and more questions.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think that your technique is the magic bullet, then you're going to get just enough permission to dispense your magic technique. But really, that's not the magic. The magic is them learning to ask for what they want. That's the magic. That's what changes lives. And that's a much more interesting journey. But you may think that, well, nothing's happening. They're just sitting there. There's a lot happening inside of them. There's a lot happening.
You have said some pretty remarkable things in the last hour and 8 minutes, but what you just said right there, I gotta tell you, is like it hit me in such a profound sort of emotional way that letting the client system coming online
yes
as slowly or as quickly as they want. Really, in Hakomi, we talk about it as organicity, like always allowing this organic process to unfold in exactly the way that it needs to.
Yeah.
But that's that was very beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I needed to hear today.
Good. Good.
If there's any other recommendations, anything that you could offer to a facilitator out there, and I guess maybe think of a psychedelic facilitator in a lot of ways, like a sex therapist as a surrogate, because I think that we're in an expanded state. We're in an incredibly vulnerable place with clients. What would you say that they need to know, but they don't know yet?
Well, I would say that find a practice buddy, play the 3-minute game, play the Wheel of Consent, so that you feel in your body what it feels like to be in serve and what it feels like to be in take, in particular those two, and how different they feel. And have yourself some fun too, of course. And so that your needs, your emotional and sensual needs are met before you go into session with client. That's probably one of the biggest things. And when you learn that in your body, then it'll start to make sense when you're with your clients, because you can get the theory of it and whatever. But when you get the feel of it, that really is what makes a difference.
I'd love that to make sure that your emotional and sensual needs are met before you go in with a client.
Yeah. I mean, this is so...
When our cup's full, then I don't need anybody else to fill it up.
Yeah. I mean, this is so obvious that you'd think we wouldn't have to say it, but we do have to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I have a little speed round for you.
Oh, okay.
So just a couple of questions, answer whatever first comes to your mind. But the first one is, why do you do this work?
Because it's fascinating. Yeah.
What is the most important thing this work has taught you?
For some reason, what's come up is how to shut up and listen to other people's wants.
That's a good one. What's the best advice you'd give to somebody that's new on their path as a practitioner?
Do your own work. Get your own therapy. Get your own body work. Go to your workshops. It's your own personal healing and development that allows you to offer it to other people. It's not the theory. You can go to college for years, and if you're not doing your own work and your own healing and your own therapy, you're not going to be very useful. Yeah.
And the last one is, how can people before I ask that, if people want to go deeper into this work, what are the options they have to go deeper, either as a facilitator, practitioner, or as just an individual that wants to do deeper work with their partner? What are the options?
Great. Well, there's the book. I'm assuming you'll link these things, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. We'll link the book.
There's the book. There's the schoolofconsent.org, which is where we offer our trainings for practitioners and also our many weekend workshops for regular people, and they're all over the world. We have a bunch of trained facilitators. There's a page on that school website that's got 8 hours of free video and just how to go through it step by step. That's free. That's what I'd say.
Beautiful. Yeah. And you've already mentioned one website, but if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
BettyMartin.org.
Okay. Well, Betty, this has been, so many of these episodes are a little more serious, and we're talking about ethics and all the stuff. Today, I laughed and had more fun with you than I have had in a lot of episodes. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
This,
thank you. I enjoyed talking to you as well.
Thanks for listening to the Psychedelic IQ podcast. If you resonated with this episode and are ready to go deeper into your personal work and practice, visit psychedeliciq.com for more in-depth articles, books, training opportunities, and professionally organized psychedelic experiences hosted in both North and South America. And as always, you're perfect and you're right on time, and the path is wiser than the traveler.